The last gavel strike had faded, but the tension in the courtroom still clung to every wall and shadow. Just moments before Judge Adah Morrison, her black robe still folded over the bench, had been the quiet authority presiding over Crestwood's most solemn space. Now she knelt on the cold linoleum floor, her hands steady in her lap, her eyes never leaving the man looming over her. The courthouse was used to shouts, tears, and confessions, but this was different. It was the silence that unsettled everyone. The kind of silence that feels thick and electric, as if the whole world is holding its breath and waiting to see what happens next. Officer Pratt's voice sliced through that hush. "You think you're somebody," he spat, his words laced with contempt, and something deeper, resentment maybe, or old anger gone sour. He was tall, broad, and wore the badge with a swagger, the kind that made people step aside on the street. In his hand he held an electric razor. The hum of the blade sounded like a storm gathering, promising violence. He gripped Ada's hair, forcing her head back, and every person in that courtroom flinched except Adah. She looked up not with defiance, but with a calm that was more unsettling than any scream. She didn't tremble, didn't plead, didn't even blink. In that moment, the line between victim and judge blurred, and the air grew colder. "You people," he sneered, "always act like you run things, like you're equal. Well, let me remind you here, I make the rules." Pratt's words were meant to humiliate, but they seemed to echo back at him, powerless. As the razor's teeth met Adah's scalp, and the first lock of her silver hair fell to the floor, the room went utterly still. Some looked away, some clutched their hands together, but not a single person moved to stop what was happening. The razor's drone filled the space, sharp and relentless, as each strand of Adah's dignity was stripped away in public view. "You should be thanking me," Pratt said through clenched teeth, dragging the blade with a roughness that made some in the gallery wince. "I'm doing the world a favor, letting them see what you really are." His grip was bruising, and the humiliation was complete. But even then, Adah did not cry. She did not weep or shrink. She simply breathed in slow and steady, as if she was memorizing the sound of her own heart to hold on to later. With every strand that fell, she seemed to shed not dignity, but something heavier, years of quiet suffering, old scars that ran deeper than the razor's bite. When it was done, Pratt yanked her chin upward. "Now you look like what you really are. A nobody," he hissed, his face so close to hers that only she could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. The room was frozen, every pair of eyes fixed on Adah, waiting for her to break. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled, a real smile, gentle and patient one, that made Pratt take a step back. The silence that followed was thunderous. "Are you finished?" she asked, her voice as calm and sure as it had been before he touched her. Pratt blinked, unprepared for her composure. What, he stammered. "I asked if you're finished." She stood, moving with quiet purpose, each motion scraping away the fear he had tried to impose like dead skin. The crowd watched as she stepped to the bench, her posture straight, her scalp bare, but her spirit undiminished. She reached for her robe, draping it over her shoulders with deliberate care. The cloth was heavy with meaning, with memory, with every case she'd ever heard and every injustice she'd ever seen. Button by button, she fastened it shut, not as armor, but as a simple truth. The room exhaled a sound like relief and disbelief tangled together. Pratt stared at her, his bravado slipping away. "You're what?" he said, his voice faltering. Adah met his eyes, her own gaze steady as sunrise. "You just assaulted the presiding judge of this court?" She said, her words as soft as velvet and twice as strong. A tremor ran through the gallery. The bailiffs, the lawyers, the court clerk, everyone who had once looked to Pratt now looked at Adah. The court clerk stood, pen set down her steps, echoing with finality as she walked to the center of the courtroom. "You thought power was something you shouted," she said, her voice carrying to every corner, "something you wore on your chest. But true power doesn't scream, it doesn't flinch, and it never asks for permission." A hush deeper than before settled over the room. Pratt spun, desperate, looking for support in faces that now turned from him. "She's bluffing," he shouted, but no one believed him anymore. A young woman in the gallery pulled out her phone and began to record. An older man nodded solemnly, like he had been waiting for this reckoning. Quietly, a legal aide spoke into his radio signal, "Internal affairs." "Confirmed." The doors at the back opened with a slow, deliberate creak, not chaos but command. Internal affairs officers in black uniforms moved in their faces unreadable. Pratt tried to retreat, but there was nowhere left to go. The metallic snap of handcuffs closed around his wrists, a cold, final punctuation mark. The camera phones caught every second. Adah did not gloat. She did not speak. She simply stood there, bald and unbroken, her robe shining as the only symbol that mattered now. In that silence, power shifted not with a scream, but with a single, unassailable truth. The world finally saw who Adah Morrison really was, and it was not what her tormentor had intended. As the echoes of the razor faded, the dignity of one woman stood against the noise, and the system learned that real power cannot be shaved away. Transition outside. The whispers began, some in awe, some in disbelief as the courthouse emptied into the dusk. But Adah Morrison's quiet defiance lingered, waiting to see who, if anyone, would stand with her. For a long moment after the courtroom cleared, Adah Morrison stood alone beneath the judge's bench, her hand resting on the carved oak rail. The fluorescent lights above cast long, cold shadows across the tiles, where her hair still lay scattered pale against the dull gray. Her robe felt heavier now, not just on her shoulders, but on her heart. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was an ache, a ringing left behind by every stare, every averted eye, every person who had watched and done nothing. Outside, the sky over Crestwood was overcast, the air close and humid. Adah stepped into the parking lot, her head bare, feeling the brush of the evening breeze more sharply than ever before. Each gust was a reminder what had been done to her was visible, inescapable. She passed a knot of people clustered by the courthouse steps. They parted without speaking, but their glances cut deeper than words. One young man pulled out his phone, holding it at his side, recording, or perhaps just pretending to. It didn't matter. In this new world, judgment didn't always come from a bench. That night, Adah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, the white porcelain cold beneath her hands. She studied the new shape of her head, the pale scalp, the angles she'd never seen before. She remembered her grandmother's hands, always gentle, braiding her hair each Sunday before church. "Your hair is your crown," her grandmother used to say. Now, looking at her reflection, Adah tried to find herself in the absence, in the place where her crown had been taken. She lifted a trembling hand to her scalp. The skin felt alien, raw. She did not cry, not yet. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from a colleague. "So what happened?" "Thinking of you." She turned it face down, unable to bear the thin comfort of pity. But the screen lit up again, and again links, screenshots, forwarded videos. Her humiliation was already everywhere. Shaved Judge was trending in the local feed, her face a thumbnail on anonymous accounts. Powerless at last, one caption jeered. Another showed a loop of Officer Pratt's razor moving across her head, slowed down, replayed again and again, the audio tweaked so his taunts echoed. She scrolled numb through comments. That's what happens when you let them wear the robe. She got what she deserved. Somebody needed to show her place. The language changed from cruelty to mockery, and from mockery to threat. She put the phone away and walked into the living room, where the old family photo sat on the mantel. Her, at 12, standing at the witness stand in a too-big dress, eyes wide, chin up. She remembered that day as clearly as yesterday. The prosecutor had asked her to recount what she'd seen, and the courtroom had looked at her with suspicion, as if truth could only come from certain mouths. "Are you sure?" the judge had said. "She's just a kid," the defense attorney had murmured. "She's going to ruin a man's life," someone whispered. Adah had spoken anyway, her words small but sure. No one believed her, and the man had walked free. She'd learned then the true cost of telling the truth: isolation. Silence, not as a retreat, but as a shield. Years later at law school, she'd filed a formal complaint after a professor cornered her in an empty hallway. "You'll ruin his career," the dean said. "And for what? Can you live with that?" She'd nodded yes, and had lived with the fallout alone. Gossip lost clerkships, the doors that quietly closed. Yet through it all, Adah held on to her sense of purpose, even as her voice grew quieter. In every courtroom she'd entered since, Adah wore her robe and her hair like armor. Both spoke of her dignity, her right to stand equal. Now one was gone, and the other felt like a borrowed costume. She wondered if anyone saw her anymore, or if they only saw the spectacle. At work the next morning, the world felt colder. Her office door was slightly ajar, the air inside heavy with unspoken words. She took her seat a head high, refusing to wear a hat or scarf. Through the frosted glass, she could see colleagues pass in the hallway. Some slowed, others hurried by. When she emerged to refill her coffee, a junior attorney cleared his throat as if about to speak, but only offered a fleeting nod before disappearing into his office. Her courtroom was filled with whispers that day. During a recess, she caught two defense lawyers murmuring near the bench. "I heard she's pressing charges," one said. "Good luck with that." "You think internal affairs will back her?" The other shrugged. "Who knows? She's a story now, not a judge." Their voices faded as she entered, the sound of her heels on the polished wood, the only reply. At lunch, Adah sat alone, her food untouched. Across the cafeteria, a group of clerks watched her. One lifted her phone and snapped a photo. The flash went off, a brief white explosion. The laughter that followed was muffled but unmistakable. Later that week, as the videos spread further, edited, remixed, twisted, Adah received messages from old friends and strangers alike. Some expressed outrage. Most simply asked what she was going to do. A few offered advice. Maybe take a leave of absence, let things die down. But Adah remembered her grandmother's words and the old woman's belief that dignity was never given, only claimed. She wouldn't hide. She wouldn't run. Each night she returned home to the same silent apartment, her scalp cold against the pillow, her mind replaying every detail, not the violence, but the moments after when no one moved, when every face in the gallery became a mirror for her pain. Yet beneath the ache, something hard and enduring began to grow. Not vengeance, not pride, but a conviction, a promise to herself that silence would not have the final word. She might have been mocked, scorned, even dismissed, but she would not be erased. As Adah locked her office late one evening, the streetlights outside flickered on, casting long shadows across the courthouse lawn. For the first time in days, she let herself imagine that somewhere in the darkness, someone was still watching, waiting for her to stand again. A soft rain drummed against the courthouse windows, each drop a quiet summons as dawn broke over Crestwood. For Adah Morrison, the morning felt different, a hush in the air, a tension gathering like a storm about to break. She stood in her chambers, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, watching the pale gray sky. Every movement she made was deliberate. Each step toward the bench, each button of her judicial robe, each measured breath, these were her rituals, reminders of who she was and who she refused to become. By the time she entered courtroom 3, the gallery was already crowded. Word had traveled faster than she could have imagined. Every seat was filled, the air buzzing with whispers and the faint hum of phones. Some faces were familiar old colleagues, a reporter or two, even her law school rival, now an assistant district attorney. But there were strangers as well. Women in business suits, teenagers in hoodies, a grandmother with silver hair braided close to her scalp. Each had come for a reason, each holding their own secret hope that today would mean something. Adah's bald head caught the glare of the overhead lights, a stark contrast to the black robe that draped her frame. There was no attempt to hide what had been done. She carried it with her, visible to all. The courtroom clerk glanced up, then away, fumbling with the day's docket. Two bailiffs stood by the double doors, eyes fixed straight ahead. Their faces betrayed nothing, but the way they shifted their feet told a different story. The morning's docket was unremarkable: a property dispute, a minor infraction, a custody hearing. Adah presided with steady resolve, her voice calm and even. But beneath the surface, everyone felt the weight of expectation. Something was coming, though no one could say what. Every so often, a phone would light up with a new notification, a hashtag, Justice for Adah, Hernan, Shakshan, Crestwood Court, Jashan, stand with her. Social media, which days before had been a tool for mockery, had shifted subtly but unmistakably towards something else. It was during a brief recess that the energy changed. Officer Pratt appeared at the back of the courtroom, flanked by two of his union representatives. His posture was defiant, but his eyes flickered with uncertainty. The room grew tense, the silence so thick it was almost oppressive. He approached the bench, the union men a step behind. Adah regarded him quietly. "Officer Pratt, you're not scheduled for today's docket," she said. Her voice was formal, without a trace of anger. He hesitated, then spoke. "I'm here on union business," he said, but the words rang hollow. The union men said nothing. Their presence meant more as a shield than as true support. As Pratt shifted uncomfortably, the courtroom doors opened once more. This time, 4 figures in dark suits entered internal affairs. Their badges gleamed, their expressions cold and professional. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the lead officer addressed the court. "Judge Morrison, by order of the state attorney's office, and on recommendation of Internal Affairs, this court is called into a special session, he said. We are here to execute a warrant. A collective gasp swept through the room. The air crackled with disbelief and anticipation. Phones were raised, the red dots of cameras blinking like fireflies in a summer night. Pratt bristled, raising his voice. This is a setup. She's trying to frame me, he shouted, voice tinged with desperation. But the crowd, once so quick to side with authority, did not answer him. Instead, they watched, waiting for Adah's response. Adah did not rise. She spoke quietly, her words filling the room. Officer Pratt, you are charged with assault and battery of a sitting judge, abuse of power, and conduct unbecoming of your office. Each word was a stone laid carefully, unyielding. The Internal Affairs agent stepped forward, cuffs at the ready. Pratt's defiance crumbled. He looked around at the bailiffs, at the clerk, at the gallery, but found no rescue. Even his union men backed away, their confidence shaken. In that instant, power shifted, not with a shout, but with a silence that pressed down like gravity. The cuffs snapped shut, metallic and final. The gallery erupted in 1,000 small ways. Murmurs, tears, applause, a single gasp. The judge's gavel, Adah's gavel, came down hard, not to silence the room, but to anchor it in truth. As Pratt was led away, the crowd's mood changed from tension to awe. The same social feeds that had mocked Adah now flooded with messages of support. This is history. We see you, Judge Morrison. She stood when no one else would. Morrison Act began trending. Videos spread not of her humiliation, but of her unbroken dignity. Local news anchors called it a turning point. The courthouse, once a stage for her public shaming, became the very ground of her vindication. The ceremony that followed was brief but powerful. The state attorney appeared at Adah's bench, offering a formal apology on behalf of the system. The clerk, who had watched it all in silence, rose and spoke. True power never asked for permission. Her words echoed in the chamber. And then from the back row, a lawyer who had always doubted Adah came forward. His apology was quiet but clear. I was wrong about you. I see that now. Others followed one by one until the courtroom was transformed not by decree, but by collective recognition of what had been lost and what had been reclaimed. Adah said little, her eyes shimmering with emotion, but her composure unbroken. She looked to the future not for herself alone, but for every voice that had ever been silenced. She understood now the robe was not her power, nor the gavel, nor even the law. It was the unwavering truth of her own presence that no one could take. As the ceremony ended, sunlight broke through the rain clouds, slanting across the benches and the faces of those gathered. A sense of possibility lingered in the air, fragile and new. A week had passed since that day, and still Crestwood Courthouse glowed with a quiet energy, as if something precious had been uncovered there. A truth once hidden, now shining for all to see. Where fear and mockery had thrived, candles now lined the stone steps each night. Notes were taped to the railing, written in every kind of handwriting. Thank you for standing up when no one else would. My daughter watched you. My grandmother prayed for you. I believe you. You showed us we matter. Every morning, Adah Morrison paused on the courthouse sidewalk to read them each message, a small light in the gray dawn. Inside, the rhythm of justice began to sound different. People who had once hurried through the marble halls with heads lowered now walked slower, lifting their gazes. The court clerk, once hesitant to speak above a whisper, called cases with newfound confidence. The bailiffs greeted Adah with respect that needed no words. Even the hum of conversation seemed less sharp, the jokes in the break room less bitter. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew the old order had shifted. Adah herself was changed, but not diminished. She moved with an assurance that grew from something deeper than pride. Each morning she stood before her mirror, her scalp still bare, the faintest shadow of new growth at her crown, and buttoned her robe with steady hands. She did not hide the mark of what had been done. Instead, she let it stand for itself, a quiet badge for all to see. On the first day of the new session, a ceremony was held on the courthouse lawn. News crews set up behind the hedges, and a crowd gathered, some there for the spectacle, many more for the meeting. The state's attorney stepped to the podium. Today, he announced, we honor not just Judge Adah Morrison, but every person who has ever been silenced, doubted, or dismissed. The Morrison Act is not merely a law, it is a promise. His words were met with applause, but the true ceremony unfolded among the faces in the crowd, women and men clasping hands, Strangers meeting each other's eyes, a sense of quiet courage spreading. After the speeches, Ada moved through the crowd. Some people reached out to touch her hand or simply nodded with gratitude. A retired bailiff saluted her, tears brimming. A group of law students surrounded her, peppering her with questions not about the scandal, but about justice and duty and what it meant to keep standing when the world wanted you to kneel. That evening, the courthouse steps were crowded with women of every age and color, their candles flickering in the twilight. A choir sang softly, "Amazing Grace," echoing down Main Street. For the first time in years, Ada allowed herself to sit on the top step and simply listen, her robe pulled around her like a banner. She was not alone. Behind her, survivors of other wrongs began to tell their stories, first in hushed voices, then louder until they found harmony in their courage. The days that followed brought changes more profound than new laws or headlines. Judges across the state reviewed their own courtrooms with fresh eyes. Officers attended mandatory training, the word accountability, no longer just a slogan but a mandate. The Morrison Act went into effect, requiring independent review of misconduct and protecting those who spoke out. Lawyers who had once dismissed complaints found themselves listening more closely. For some, it was too little too late. For others, it was a first step toward trust. Yet for Ada, the greatest legacy was quieter. Each morning she found small tokens on her bench, a daisy, a folded note, sometimes a child's drawing. She kept them all in a wooden box beneath her chambers, a reminder that symbols matter not for their beauty, but for the meaning they carry. One gray afternoon, as spring rain spattered the courthouse windows, a new face appeared at the back of her courtroom. A young black girl, no more than 13, sat in the front row. Her hair was braided close to her head, her posture rigid with hope and uncertainty. Through the long docket, the girl watched Ada intently, how she listened, how she ruled, how she held her silence, not as a weapon, but as an invitation to speak. At the close of court, Ada caught the girl's eye. She offered a nod, subtle but warm. No words passed between them, but the message was clear. You are seen. You are safe. The girl's face lit up with something that looked like belief. From that day, others followed. Students came to watch hearings, teachers led field trips, community groups held justice nights in the courthouse lobby. The building itself, once intimidating, became a place where stories were told and truth was honored. Even those who had once mocked or doubted Ada now saw her with respect and sometimes with the humility that comes from learning what dignity really means. Adah Morrison never needed to be called a hero. She did not crave applause, nor did she stand for headlines. She stood so that, in some small way, others might see themselves reflected in her steadiness. In time, the candles faded, and the courthouse steps returned to ordinary stone. But the legacy remained, a community willing to look, to listen, to learn. And a judge who had once lost everything but in the losing had helped everyone rise,